In Ross chapter 12, we are dealing with what are called something called construct chains. Construct chains. And this is going to be a little bit of a long chapter in that there's a lot of material to go through. But this is a very important chapter. This is the chapter where all the things that I've been telling you to memorize, the reason for learning those things comes into play. So you remember the red rider problem? We're going to have to know our red rider problem and how those things are resolved. Do you remember your noun rules? Cuss, old preacher sermons are long, oops, ras vocal shiva. You're going to have to know those for this chapter. Remember what happens when you have a makaf attached to a word? What happens to the word to the right of the makaf or right before the makaf? It loses its stress. Okay. Remember not just the red rider problem when there's two vocal shivas, but when there's a compound shiva next to a vocal shiva. We got to know how red rider deals with all this. Remember your vowel chart that you just learned and just had as part of your quiz? When you change vowels from short to long, what do they like to do? Well, they like to stay within the same vowel class, right? So A classes will slide up and down the A class column. I class vowels will go up and down, stay within their vowel class. So will U class vowels. We're going to need to know that kind of stuff. So pretty much everything from chapters 1 to 11 get crammed into chapter 12. And I didn't understand all the stuff I've taught you when I learned Hebrew. So when I got to seminary and got to even doctoral work, so you understand more about some of the basics of Hebrew than I did, believe it or not. And I could not understand what was happening when I got to chapters like this one because I didn't understand the rules. I just thought everything was irregular. But things are not irregular. There is method to the madness when it comes to Hebrew. And so I want to help you assimilate this material in a way that's easier to understand than what I tried to do. So what we have in chapter 12 is a chapter devoted to what many people call construct chains. And what happens is this. I can put two nouns side by side in a phrase, and I'll go ahead and just do it with the word Seuss. Let's take Seuss, and we'll use David as our example. Remember what David means? David. Okay, so reading from right to left in Hebrew. What does Seuss David mean?
Horse David.
Okay, horse David. That sounds like broken English, doesn't it? Horse David. What does this mean? How would I make sense of it? What I have here is a structure in Hebrew where I have two nouns. So this is noun number 1. So I will put the number 1 under it. Noun number 2. I like to refer to these things as thing 1, thing 2. Because a noun is a person, place, or thing. Right? A noun's a person, place, or thing. So we'll just use one of those words for a noun, a thing. The thing 1 is the first noun. Thing 2 is the second noun. So I have two nouns together. And in English, the most common thing I'm going to do when I have thing 1 followed by thing 2 is I'm going to add the word of in between. Horse of David. So horse of David. So in this situation, David is related to horse in terms of possession, right? When I say horse of David, what I mean is David's horse. Okay, you learned the expression Beit Lechem, which in Hebrew, Beit is normally spelled Bayit with an accent mark here, right? And then Lechem. So Lechem is the word for bread or food. Bayit is the word for house. This is thing 1, this is thing 2. Okay, so I'll just underline my nouns here. How would I translate this? This is house, bread, but what do I want to insert between them? The word of. House of bread. Now, those of you that have had a little bit of Greek or a lot of bit of Greek, what would you, how would you define this? Well, this would be something like a genitive phrase, right? So that's another way to think of this, is that the second noun is a kind of genitive noun. So what I'm going to do is let me go down here, and I want to give you some labels for this. Okay, so thing one is referred to as the construct noun. So just put the word construct noun. Thing two is described as the absolute noun. Okay? And when the two are together, where I have thing one immediately followed by thing two, this is called a construct chain. Now, other grammarians and first-year grammar books have slightly different terms for these things. So I'm going to give you all of the kinds of terms that are used for this. Okay? I could also describe noun one as the head noun, and the second noun as the genitive noun. Okay, so head noun and genitive noun. And the two together would be called, if you're using the terms head and genitive, a genitive phrase. Okay, a genitive phrase, where the second noun in some way modifies or qualifies the first noun. Okay, and then another way to describe this is to call the first noun the bound form and the second noun the free form. And people who use these terms refer to the whole thing, thing one and thing two together, as a bound phrase. Okay? What we're going to find, oh, by the way, I should have changed this. Whenever I make thing one part of a construct chain and slap it up next to thing two, it is going to lose its stress. All right? And when it does, the form of the first noun could undergo some modification. And we're going to walk through what those are. But bayit then becomes bait, and that's why this is beit lechem instead of bayit lechem. All right? So house of bread. Okay? So those are the sorts of labels we're going to be using for these construct chains or genitive phrases or bound phrases. Now, here's what we want to do. We want to talk about how to form the construct form. The absolute form, or the genitive form or the free form, this is the normal lexical form. What's the lexical form? It's the dictionary form of the word that you learned when you learned your vocabulary word. So what is the lexical form of bait? Bayit. So when I say the absolute form or the free form, what I'm talking about is the normal form. Okay? The construct form could be modified. It could be a modified form. There could be some vowel changes or some changes to the endings. And those are going to be the ones that tip their hand and say, hey, we're not just two separate nouns hanging out that happen to be next to each other. Rather, we are two nouns in a construct chain or bound phrase, and you have to read the two together as a single constituent within your sentence. So I could say something like, Naomi was from Beit Lechem. And I need to make sure that Beit Lechem stay together, and I translate it together. Naomi was from Bethlehem. Okay? Over here, if I have Sus David, I need to keep those together. They're a construct chain. And I could say something like, Sus David is really handsome. The horse of David is handsome. Or I love Sus David, which means I love the horse of David. But I'm not going to stick the horse one place in my translation and stick David somewhere else. They need to hang together in your translation. Okay? The horse of David or David's horse. Don't break those up. we'll talk about some of the rules for construct chains in just a moment. So when we have a construct form, let me just jot here, it will frequently, it's not always the case, but frequently is modified or changed, okay? The form might be different than what you learned. In the case of bayit, it changed to bait, right? But look at the word sus. Is there any difference between the construct form of sus and the absolute form? There's not. They are identical to each other. So you can't always tell by the first noun whether it's a construct noun. But if you can tell it's a construct noun, then the second noun will need to go with it and be treated as a single unit. Okay? Now, here are some things that we need to know about construct chains. Okay? The first thing is this. Thing one, how am I going to label thing one? Thing one is the construct form, the head noun, or the bound form. Okay? Thing one, whenever thing one gets put in a construct chain, it will lose its stress. It's going to surrender its stress to the next noun, to the absolute. So it's basically identical to putting a makaf after thing one, right? Remember how when you put a makaf after a noun, it loses its stress to the next noun, right? A construct chain is basically like putting a makaf between thing one and thing two. All right? Thing one always loses its stress. Now, if thing one loses its stress, this is going to create some syllable rule problems, right? It could create some syllable rule problems, and I'm going to maybe have some vowel changes that occur. So the second thing that's going to happen, and the third thing that's going to happen are matters of modifying. So I'm going to lose my stress in thing one, and then I could have, and these all pertain to thing one, I could have changes to the endings on thing one. And then thirdly, changes to the vowels on thing one. Thing two is not the one that gets modified, so don't worry about that one. It's only thing one that loses its stress. Therefore, it can change its endings and change its vowels. But they're going to be very patterned changes. So we'll learn the patterns. You already know most of them because you've been tracking with me since chapter 1. Okay? So what I want to do is look at the handout here for what I've called the absolute and construct endings on nouns and adjectives. So go to your handout, and I'll pull it up right here. What this is going to show us is what the changes are to the endings on construct nouns when they become thing one in a thing one, thing two relationship, a construct chain. Look at my absolute forms of sus. I'm going to put those in blue. Okay? The absolute forms of sus are sus for a male horse, 1. Susa is a female horse called a mare. Susim is my masculine plural for horses, and susot is my feminine plural for mares. Okay? Now, what if I want to form the construct state, or the construct form, of the singular, masculine singular noun, sus, horse? What's the change of ending? The change of ending is nothing. Because does sus have an ending to change? No. The ending is 0 in the absolute, so the construct doesn't have a changed ending. Okay? So the ending is still 0. So there's no change here. Look at the feminine singular, though. Susa is mare, but if I want to say something like the mare of David, or David's mare, Susa becomes susat. You see that pathak tav has replaced the kamat. Okay? Remember how I told you that kametse is the most common feminine singular ending, but what's the second most common? A final tav. You see this final tav right here. Okay, that's marking a feminine singular form. So susa becomes susat. So that is definitely a change, right? So I'm going to highlight that ending in yellow. Let's take a look at the masculine plural form. Susim, over here, it's a masculine plural absolute. But if I want to say the horses of David, susim changes to susay. Do you see I've dropped the im ending and I've added the sereyod ending. How do you pronounce sereyod? A. So I like to call this the Canadian ending. This sounds Canadian, eh? Right? So if you see a Canadian ending, then that's the masculine plural construct, okay? And so that is different from im. Im changes to a, so we will highlight that ending there. And then look at the last one. Susot is the feminine plural absolute, mares. And if I want to say the mares of David, and I turn this into the construct form, is it any different than the absolute ending? No, it's just the same. So there are really only two places where the endings might change. And what are they? The feminine singular and the masculine plural, okay? Those are the only places that we have changes to endings. Zero ending doesn't change because there isn't an ending to change. And oat stays oat. And by the way, I like to refer to this as the Quaker ending. You got to eat your Quaker oats, right? So we have Canadian endings and Quaker endings. Okay, good. So those are the endings, and that's fairly simple. The part that really throws people is this matter of the internal vowel changes, but you will not be surprised by this at all. So let me just jot this down to see the handout for the endings. Why are there no vowel changes, by the way, in the words sus and susa? Yes, because shurik is an unchangeable vowel because it's historically long. So can't change it even if I wanted to. All right? But let me give you a quick example of what sort of vowel changes you might have here. Oops. And we'll just end with this real quick example. Let's say we want to talk about the hand of David. Okay? So David's the topic of discussion. I want to say the hand of David. What's the word for hand? It's yod. And yod is spelled with a long A. Okay? Is this open or closed? Yod. Is it tonic, pretonic, propertonic? It's tonic. So when yod is in the absolute, the lexical form, and it's not attached to anything in a construct chain, it is tonic and closed. But if I now want to say the hand of David, Yad David, it becomes thing 1 in a construct chain, and David becomes thing 2, the absolute. Is this still closed? Yes. But is it tonic anymore? No, it loses its stress, surrenders it to the second noun. So David, the vid part is tonic, the da part is pretonic, and the yod is now what? Propertonic. Whenever we turn this into the construct form, it is going to lose its stress. Well, we're going to treat this as one long word. Remember, we're going to pronounce it, and we're going to translate it as one long unit, as if it were a single word, sort of like having a McCafe here. Okay? So it's now closed in propertonic. What does the cuss rule tell me has to happen to that long A vowel in yod? No, it's still closed. Closed, unaccented syllables require a short vowel. So this kametz has to become a pathak, right? So to say the hand of David is not yod with a long A, but yod with a short A. What about the endings? Does the ending for yod change? No, because yod doesn't have an ending, does it? So when I have no ending, I don't have any ending change. If I had an eem, it goes to a, Canadian. If I have an ah, it goes to ot. And those are the only changes I make. Okay, so yod just remains unchanged, but the vowel changed. And this is how I know I have a true construct chain. And I have to translate this as the hand of David. Okay, does that make sense? So we're going to walk through a whole lot of vowel changes that are going to happen in Hebrew. And I will do that at our next class session on Wednesday. So just come back and soak it all up.